Welcome back and thank you so much for staying with us. Now, with the Electoral Court set to deliver its ruling next Monday, we are joined on the line by Dr. John Nakuta, a law lecturer at the University of Namibia, to help us unpack the court proceedings and what they mean. A very good evening to you, Dr. Nakuta. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Absolute pleasure to have you. First things first, Doctor, could you briefly just explain the requirement for payment of security before a high court case can proceed?
Well, the issue of payment of security is part of our legal system, specifically in several matters, that obviously all of us know that in order to institute legal proceedings, there are several costs involved. You, for example, need to obtain the services of a legal practitioner. Like in this case, advocates, senior counsel had to be obtained, the services thereof. And so the issue of security is mainly an issue of trying to secure, if in the event the matter were to go to court and a decision might just be given against you. So there must be a security, some kind of security to make sure that at the end of the whole proceedings, security, this will be paid by the parties. So that's really basically, I don't want now to go into technicalities and whatever, but that's basically what it is. And so today's proceedings really started with that first point, in that the three parties, that is, SWAPO party, the ECN, and the president obviously raised the issue of security, and of course they demanded quite a big number. SWAPO, for example, and I'm talking about a correction, 600,000. The ECN 600,000, and SWAPO 650,000, and then the president 500,000. So all in all, what they have then demanded from the two parties to pay, especially for now, only the IPC is to pay something to the tune of 1.8 million. And that is a technical, a procedural issue, because it would mean if the parties do not have security for that amount, then the proceedings cannot, the matter cannot go further. And so that's why the court had to hear several points being made in terms of security, and then the court took a decision based on that, and it decided that the amount, obviously, that was demanded from the three parties were way too much, very prohibitive, and certainly served as a bar, not in the words of the court, but in my words, as a bar to prevent the parties in this case to access justice. And the court took a decision that combined the three parties must be, the amount payable to the parties is 350,000, significantly lower from what the three parties demanded in the beginning.
Very well. Now, Doctor, what's the key difference between the case currently being heard in the High Court and the one challenging the election in the Supreme Court? Could you just give us a bit of balance between what's the difference really between those two?
Yes, very relevant question. The Electoral Act, in the wisdom of the legislature, made making a difference in terms of bringing a challenge, whether it relates. If it relates to the National Assembly, that challenge must be instituted in the Electoral Court, which is the equivalent of the High Court. However, when the challenge relates to presidential challenge, the presidential elections, that challenge can only be instituted in the Supreme Court. For whatever reason, the legislatures make that decision, and what plays out in this particular instance is that the challenge relating to the National Assembly, when it comes to the proclamation that was made by the President, remember on the 28th, the President made a proclamation to say that there would be 2 days of extra voting on the 29th and the 30th, and only in 36 particular polling stations. Now, that only didn't apply to the National Assembly. It also applied to the presidential election.
Yeah.
However, based on the legal scheme that we are having, the challenge related to the National Assembly can only be heard by the Electoral Court, and even though very identical, but as it relates to the presidential elections, can only be heard in the Supreme Court. And this is basically the difference. That's why, for example, the court yesterday asked the parties to address it on whether or not the matter should not be stayed until the Supreme Court would have heard and had rendered judgment on this very same issue, because it pertains to both kinds of elections.
Yeah.
And of course, we know that the Supreme Court would hear the presidential challenge on the 10th of February. And in terms of the law, they would be having 14 days to deliver that judgment. So the idea is that after the 24th at least,
Yeah.
then the High Court, Electoral Court rather, would then come back to this matter if in the event there was a decision based on the proclamation.
Very well. So why exactly can't both cases be handled in the same court? Just if you can just give us perhaps a brief answer.
That is what all of us do. I, for one, certainly don't understand. I don't understand the logic why our legislature opted for this dual route of challenging election or instituting election disputes. I don't have the answer, but this is currently the legal framework and within which we must maneuver until such time Parliament, in their wisdom, would come to their senses to see that the current situation is really cumbersome, it is unnecessarily costly, and it causes unnecessarily delays.
Very well. Now, in conclusion, Doctor, we now know that the Electoral Court is set to deliver its ruling next week, Monday. What can we expect from the court ruling on Monday?
Well, the court would basically just come back with one thing, and that is to make or to give its ruling based on the issue of whether the proceedings currently happening in the Electoral Court should be stayed until such time the Supreme Court has handed down its ruling on the proclamation, and only thereafter would the matter continue to be heard by the Electoral Court. The very same matter that we've heard today, because there's a lot of issues that must be argued before the Electoral Court and not before the Supreme Court.
Very well, Doctor. Of course, we're all anticipating and hoping to see those developments come Monday when the court, of course, still continues. But thank you so much, Dr. Nakuta, for making the time to share your expert knowledge on this.
Thank you very much, John.
Absolute pleasure. That was Dr. Nakuta was sharing his insights, of course, on what we are now having at hand, the Electoral Court, which is set to deliver its ruling next week.